Hi, I'm Michael Saxon, and this is a supporting video for my website lastpost.net. This video is a snapshot of an extensive situation analysis contained in my books available for free on the website lastpost.net. Western civilization is imploding. The rot is coming from within. Liberalism and neoliberal corporatism are the sources of this decay. I explain how and why in my books and on lastpost.net, but here are some of the main reasons for the West's coming demise. I've written them on both sides of me on the whiteboard. They're in a rough order of importance, but that's not so important as what we're actually talking about. By the way, all of these arose quickly after the 1960s when the West abandoned the Judeo-Christian heritage it was built on. So the first up is a democratic lockdown. An entrenched liberal come corporate dependent political class have gutted democracy. For all practical purposes, democracy does not serve ordinary people. Its development was deliberately stalled about 50 years ago, with one exception, the recognition of women's rights. You vote every few years, but in the absence of binding referenda, which is the Swiss system of real or direct democracy, also known as BCIR, binding citizens initiated referenda, your vote counts for very little. The Swiss have been doing it for 150 plus years, and it works very well. The next is lost personal freedoms. Free thought, free speech, freedom of association, equality before the law, freedom of religion, certainty of contract and property rights are all being subverted to defend a liberal and corporate agenda intolerant of better alternatives. Examples of the jackboot and brown shirt curtailment of these basic rights are growing almost daily, if you're willing to look for it. The next is the lost acceptance of evil. The West, under atheism, no longer recognizes evil. Everything is postmodern relativism. A civilization that believes in nothing soon comes to nothing. This will inevitably see the West revert to paganism, including incest, child sex, and cultish belief systems, all common in the pre-Christian pagan era. Next, an Orwellian newspeak, like transphobia, for example, and doublespeak. Under the left's rules of political correctness and hate speech, if you voice alternative views on feminism, political correctness and hate speech, moral values, Islam or multiculturalism, in just about any sphere, expect to be targeted and ridiculed. Myopic left-only universities are brainwashing students with this garbage. If you're a white male, expect even worse. You are part of the privileged patriarchy. If you come from it at all, from a Christian perspective, expect derision and persecution. Demographic decline. Too many women have abandoned their child-rearing role, and Western populations are now in a steep demographic decline that some demographers claim is now irreversible. Too many men and women have been encouraged by liberal policies to be irresponsibly careless about preserving their culture. The West is now reposed on its demographic deathbed. The emasculation of men. Feminism or feminist overreach has led to a swath of bad statistics related to boys and men. I'll do a separate video on this at some point. But the vital point here is that longitudinal research has proven over-feminized societies inevitably collapse. They lose their vitality, their forward drive, their philosophic coherence, their competitiveness, their martial ability, and become easy prey for the dominant masculine ordered world all around them. It's happened throughout history, and it is now happening in and to the West. It's worth noting that Obama's feminized presidency was accompanied by sweeping and large-scale violent masculine-driven events across the world. Feminized geopolitics cannot compete. Debt and inequality. Most of you already spend your life paying off unnecessary debt. Unnecessary because there is absolutely no need to issue credit as an interest-bearing debt to private banking interests. Interest or usury, to use an old epithet, exist as a wealth concentrating and paupering device to make a few wealthy at the expense of the rest of us. Hence, the gross wealth disparities that are helping to tear the West apart. The great majority are politically and economically disenfranchised by our engineered banking, fiscal policy and financial market systems, and political class as well. So a very small feudal-style elite can pursue agendas opposed to the West's civilizational survival. Statism. Governments have become extractive, which is the worst form of government, drawing huge sums through taxation out of the productive economy and transferring it to social welfare provision that does little more than support those least motivated to become self-reliant. Statism insists that individualized opportunities must be replaced by general social policy outcomes. This is the same ethos that governs Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao's great leap backwards in China. Access to real-time justice. The rule of law offers you little hope of personal protection against your loss of freedoms and your exploitation in whatever form that may take, because you can't afford to access it. It's become the monopoly preserve of a privileged legal class and is now part of what I call the problem. See my other videos. Not any solution. And it is also easily weaponized against you by both the liberal elite and the corporate world. The Toynbee effect. Now you'll have to go to my books to learn what I mean by that. But here's a brief description. Most of you are confused and ill-informed over what is happening. Your own misinformed beliefs and general anything goes latitude, or lassitude I should say, are your worst enemies. The mainstream media majors on left liberal propaganda and you are too distracted and or complacent to research what is really going on. Empirically, this has been proven to be an essential feature of all civilizations in collapse. The antidote is a strategy like that offered by what I call the Next Generation Church, or NGC strategy, and the leadership of the one institution, the church, with the historic and moral mandate to champion it. And my last on the list is, or second to last, an all-pervasive social deficit. Crime, social dysfunction, child abuse, family breakdown, substance abuse, gender and other identity divisions, welfare dependence, psychiatric disorders, and gross wealth inequality are all products of left liberal social and corporate economic policies going back over 50 years. I can remember when most of these problems hardly existed. Divorce, for example, in my youth was about 1/10 of what it is now. Society simply can't survive when their most important institution, the family, is so dysfunctional and redefined. Finally, cultural deconstruction, or what many call postmodernism. The left embarked on a process of civilizational deconstruction, drawing on a stupid, humanist, Marxist, and postmodern progressive agenda, and that process is all but complete. We're now just living off the legacy of once was, while our societies suffer from huge socially and economically damaging effects. And I've canvassed quite a few of those already. The main target of this attack has been the West's values, both moral and societal. The overall effect, in the absence of our founding values, has been lost social capital and the reduction of human capital. Both are terms explained in my books. They are the glue that bind civil society together. They've been replaced with diversity that breeds nothing but tribalism, identity politics breeding narcissism, and an exaggerated sense of individualism and entitlement. And liberal-inspired law that supports political correctness and a raft of other inroads into personal freedoms and common sense. Take these things together, and all we can look forward to is increasing social dysfunction, political weakness, and division. Civilizational vulnerability is growing exponentially. Corruption, serfdom, and general Orwellian oppression with a brave new world veneer is rising. But I can't accept it is all a foregone conclusion, can you? If the West's founding can be recaptured, then there is still hope. And I map the way on lastpost.net and in my books. You have to recognise what I call the problem. It forms the kernel of my 3 books on the whole subject. You can download them as free PDFs off lastpost.net. Then you have to grasp why the West must adopt what I call the 12 reforms if it is to stand any chance of escaping the mess it is in. The 12 reforms address all the issues I've listed here on the whiteboard and just covered with you. The first 8 would dismantle Western liberalism, which is nothing more than just a reworked fascism, and the last 4 would take an essentially feudal corporatism apart. The 12 reforms would require an ideas reformation that must ignore all the noise offered up by politicians, academia, and the media in opposition. In NGC, I describe a strategy for bringing the church in from the wilderness. It represents the biggest philosophical, spiritual, and existential threat to liberalism and corporatism. Hence, the decades-long campaign to both discredit the church and to prevent the church from having any real effect in the public square. If the West is to save itself, the institution around which the civilization was built has to come back in from the cold, because secular society cannot save itself from itself on its own.